I was watching a car commercial recently and had a person in a white coat telling me that this car was worth buying. And I thought for a moment, why was there a person in a lab coat telling me what to buy? It's almost as if they expect that if a person in a lab coat, most likely a scientist, is telling me to buy something, then there seems to be a chance that that thing is worth buying. There's a scientific benefit to buying it. Almost as if just because a scientist told you, it adds more oomph, it adds more credibility to the product that they're about to deliver onto you. We live in a world where science is accepted. Scientists are held to a higher standard, and that if a scientist is telling you, even subconsciously, that you should buy something, then you should go ahead and do it. The world seems like it respects science, right? Right? If you lived during the 2020 COVID pandemic, then you would know that's not exactly the case. There's still lots of people who don't believe science. You see signs that say, I believe in science, as if science is something that people will stop believing in. Or that there are vaccine deniers, there are flat earth believers. There's lots of things that seem anti-science at the moment. And I could do a big video about looking into why people don't believe in certain things. A mistrust of the scientific community may be something that is worth looking into and analyzing. But for now, so I'm going to make some assumptions that the scientific community is usually right at all times, and that what matters is how they communicate out of the ivory tower and into the general public. We're going to be looking over two scientific studies, both very similar in scope, but very different in reception, and seeing exactly why one study was readily accepted by the public while the other one was not. And we can see what was going on, what was the differences, and we could also figure out how in the future scientists could publicly communicate their ideas so that the general public might be more receptive to them. So let's do that. The year is 1991, and we are talking about Simon LeVay, a neurobiologist who is an openly gay man and who is also trying to see if there are any biological connections or differences between gay men and straight men. So he's performed a study in 1991 looking at the nuclei of the anterior hypothalamus of the brain, or the INAH3. The hypothalamus is also linked to sexuality, and it's believed that its shape influences the sexuality of a person. So Simon LeVay theorized that homosexual men and heterosexual women had the same size brain, while the heterosexual men and the homosexual woman had a bigger size hypothalamus part in that brain section. So here's what he did. He gathered a bunch of brains from supposed homosexual men and brains from supposed heterosexual men. And his findings was that on average, heterosexual men had twice the size of the INAH3, twice the size, larger than the homosexual men. One caveat is that this is proof of correlation, it's not a causation effect, but also he got all the brains from the homosexual men of those who died of AIDS. Could that play a factor? We don't know. But this did prove that there is a biological link in a brain that had something to do with homosexuality. And just like that, Simon LeVay became a hero in the LGBT community. The Times reported him, widely reported. Lots of people knew about the gay brain that was going on, and he was considered a large hero, well accepted, widely published. It was amazing. Now here's the odd, funny thing, is that a couple years before, another neurobiologist found something very similar, but the reaction that he had was very different. Introducing Dick Swab. He is a Dutch man, a straight man, and a neurobiologist, same as Simon LeVay. Except his team of scientists, they were looking at the hypothalamus, a different part of the hypothalamus that Simon LeVay looked at. But in this different part of the hypothalamus, they found that the homosexual man had a much bigger portion than the straight man in the hypothalamus. He had a bigger part of that brain. But here's the thing. That study was considered offensive to the LGBTQ community. In fact, Dick Swab got death threats for performing such a study. And exactly why was that? Simon LeVay and Dick Swab, they found very complementary studies together, but one was celebrated and the other was not. So what exactly is going on here? So the first thing to note is that Simon LeVay was gay when he did this study, which could mean that there was a conflict of interest, which could be a scientific liability. Because he is gay, he has a special interest in proving that his scientific study had some merit. So there is that going on there. But on the other hand, you have someone like Dick Swab, a person who's not gay, no strong personal connection to his studies, doing his study on something that a lot of people find very personal, something about their sexuality. And this might be crossing a line a bit, but there is perhaps some subconscious feeling about having a white man with no connection, perhaps a man of Aryan descent, perhaps trying to dig through biological differences between a gay person and a straight person. And it could perhaps bring up some, as I said, subconsciously, it could bring up some Hitlerian vibes, which is not a real word, but you know what I meant. So, it makes sense that a community that is so hypersensitive and so used to being attacked would be very aware of the implications it would be of an Aryan man finding, you could say, genetic deficiencies between a gay person and a straight person and what that might bring out to the community versus a gay person proving that things are biologically different because they're supposed to be. The context is very different. So in a way, this means that the lead scientist, who that person is, what demographics that person belongs to, kind of matters. Which kind of sucks because science is supposed to be an all-around truth. Shouldn't matter who says it. But when it comes to communicating and making the audience more receptive, it really does seem like it matters who the lead scientist is, what race, ethnicity, what sexual orientation, especially if the study has something to do with something as private and personable as sexuality. It's taking me a long time to eat this chocolate. So yeah, that's kind of like representation in a nutshell. Who the lead scientist is kind of important. If you look at some of his interviews, he can come off as a little patronizing. There's a phrase he would say as if, oh, you wouldn't understand, you're just a layperson. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of journalists who were interviewing him got a little ticked off and decided to not present him in the most greatest of ways. So that could also be a factor. So scientists need to be careful of how they present in front of others. We get it, you're smart, but you don't have to make us feel dumb. Also, can we talk about academic papers and just how scary they are to read? They're absolutely hideous and horrifying for me to read. I'm just a layman, just like what Dick Swab said. How am I supposed to understand the studies that's out there? And they also look really boring as well. Like, for me, it took me a lot to look through some of the studies and to actually read through it. And I'm telling you, I skipped most things that were said. But that kind of goes into account that, like, why do academics write the way they are? And I know this could go into a whole other topic, but generally I think there are some scholars that do agree that academic writing has gone too far and too flamboyant. Either they're trying to get a grant and they're trying to seem smart, or they're trying to impress people because they're insecure. I mean, there's a whole plethora of reasons why academic writing is really terrible. I think we should have scientists take writing classes. I think that would be a lot better. I think they already do, but whatever. But something else too is that we should be taught how to have scientific literacy. I think scientific articles and journals are very important things to learn, and we should learn how to read them more authentically, in a more holistic way. I read lots of literature, political, governmental, all sorts of literature, but the scientific literature, it's not really talked about in schools. And I feel like that's sort of literature that is, one, really boring, but two, really important. It's something we should learn to analyze, and maybe even critique, and perhaps more emphasis should be placed on that. True, in my class, Physics by Inquiry, we learn how to do science by hand. We experiment, we form questions, but I think learning how to write and learning how to read these scholarly articles in a manner that is very easily done would be much more useful to a well-educated person in our 21st century world. While I'm sure there are many other variables that account towards proper scientific communication, from this case study between these two scientific studies and comparing them, perhaps we can see that it helps to have a lead scientist with a personal connection to the project that they are working in. So by having a generally good disposition and good at communicating in general, but also trying to see how we can make scientific articles much more easier to read, and also place more emphasis in learning from those scientific articles, knowing why they're written, how to analyze studies, and that perhaps doing that can help us have a more educated society and a more better style of life. So I hope this video does that, but most importantly, I hope this video gets me an A, because that would be nice! So anywho, I hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful day, enjoy your life, and to my professor, I hope you have a good summer. Alright, bye-bye!